And we also know, so all of the research over the last 60, 70 years that's been conducted on motivation and performance of people in the workplace, international research across sectors, shows that the most important factor determining people's motivation and performance is rather banal conclusion, but is whether they've got a limited number of agreed, clear, challenging objectives. The agreed bit is important because if you impose things on people, then they don't own them so much. So there's got to be discussion. And I'm kind of talking a little bit blithely about agreeing objectives. It ain't easy. It requires really thoughtful conversations. But the benefits in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of teams and individuals are enormous. This is evidence-based practice. Challenging, because the more challenging the objectives that we set are, the higher our motivation and performance on it, as long as they're within realistic boundaries. You know, our business here is caring for the health and well-being of the people of these communities. For sure, we should be setting challenging objectives that we really want to make progress towards achieving. But if what we then do is say to people, well, you didn't achieve all of your 5 or 6 objectives, so you kind of failed. Next time they come to have the conversation, they'll set them as low as they possibly can. So our orientation as a leadership community has to be to value progress towards achievement of objectives, to celebrate people's progress towards the achievement of objectives. And the final bit about this is, of course, we also have to be giving feedback to teams and individuals as often as possible, daily ideally, so that they're seeing what progress they're making against these objectives that have been set. So for example, for team working, I always say that once as a team we've set our objectives, you've now got your agenda for team meetings. What else should be on your agenda? If these are the 5 or 6 key objectives for the team for the coming year or month, that's the agenda for team meetings. Everything should fit under those. Do you know what I mean? It provides that clarity and that focus. You go as far as you possibly can. Because our role as leaders, I think, is to simplify. As Sarah was saying, our role is to simplify, is to help people understand what's really important here. These are examples, by the way. I'm not saying your team should have an objective of each of those, but these are the sorts of things that one would hope to. And I would say, for every one of your teams, improving the effectiveness with which we work with other teams to ensure high-quality care is essential. Every team in this organization should have that as one of its objectives, for sure. But given what we know about the power of goals and objectives set in this way, it's really important that as leaders we do aim for simplification. I mean, your point is interesting. A few years ago, in fact, Jane Cummings was reminding me that I think it was 6 years ago, I worked with the executive team of NHS England when David Nicholson was still head. And we did this exercise of setting team objectives, and they got it down to 5. And then I came back to the next meeting, and we went through the 5, and then they flipped over the page, and there were another 30 on the back. That's true. And I think you're absolutely right that we conflate doing more with doing better, when actually, I'll show you some data later that suggests doing less, we do better. We achieve more by doing less, yeah. And most of you will be members of multiple teams, I'm guessing, yeah? So as Sarah said, we we took the research that we'd been doing on teams at Aston University and then tried to make it applicable out there in organizations. And one of the things that we've discovered that's been really helpful to people is, for those who are members of multiple teams, what the data tell us is you can't be an effective member of lots of teams. The more teams you're a part of, the less effectively you can be a part of any of them. So we developed the idea of the home team. So I need to be clear about what my home team is, where I get my direction from, where I get my learning from, where I get my support from. To be really clear about what my home team is and to recognize that these other teams, my commitment can't be as great. And the home team, we say, is the team that has most influence on the objectives of all of the other teams we're part of. So the example for me was, 6 or 7 years ago, I was the head of the business school at Aston. I was the dean of the business school, and I had a management team, lovely people, wonderful team. I felt so held by them, and they were so creative and so supportive. And I was a member of the university management team as well. I didn't quite feel so warm and close to them. It was a bit more difficult, a bit more tricky. But they were my home team because they had most influence over the objectives of all of the other teams I was part of. So my primary, if you like, loyalty in a way was to that university management team. Does that help? And I'll talk a little about the concept of team when we come on to talk about teamwork. So I think the first is we have to be present to really listen with fascination. We have to be present. And we can practice being present through things like mindfulness, meditation. Another way of practicing being present and listening with fascination is remembering to listen deeply. I'm listening to understand what this person says. And to be able to reflect back what they've said is a really powerful way of practicing that deeper listening. But techniques like mindfulness, learning to be present with the other person, and I suppose that orientation of compassion, of wanting to help, provides some of the motivation to be present rather than to be preoccupied. And in my experience, personally, I find that listening with fascination is actually not tiring. It's the opposite. It's enriching because I connect more deeply with the other person. There's a more powerful sense of belonging. But I think your point is important because I think it takes practice. As leaders, we have to practice that being present and really listening deeply. And learning to deal with the impulse to say, I haven't got time for this conversation. I need to get on to the next thing I've got to do. Of course, we have to balance that depending on what the next thing we have to do is. But do you know what I mean? It's about learning not just to be present with the other person, but to be aware of the reactions and impulses going on inside us as well. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is taking those first two areas, an inspirational vision of high quality care and clear aligned goals at every level with helpful feedback. To what extent are these cultural elements present and strong within the trust? And what do you as a leader need to do to ensure presence and sustainability of these elements? So one of the things that we do with the team journey that Sarah referred to is we encourage leaders to map the community of teams. So for your team, let's map all of the teams that we need to interact with and the strength or weakness or difficulties of those relationships. So we begin to pay attention to how not just the team works, but how the community of teams work. Certainly in looking at community mental health teams, one of the things we discovered was there's such a problem in the gaps between those teams. You know, people saying, well, that service user doesn't fit our diagnostic categories, so not for us, I'm afraid. And so the person then goes to another team that doesn't fit with us, and then they end up, you know, either in a police station or homeless or whatever because they're not cared for. And so I think your point about the importance of aligning the team community, getting the team community as a whole to align, is really powerful. So that's why I think what Sarah was saying about simplifying what we do, that's the responsibility of this community in this room. You know, we have to ensure that there are paths through the forest so that no one gets lost. Because one of the causes of staff stress is workload, and another is role ambiguity. I'm not sure what's important here, what I should be doing. I mean, I think what's helpful, for example, is if the executive team sets its shared objectives, that those are seen by the whole organisation. So everyone, oh, that's what their priorities are, that's what they're working. That begins to help you, because those objectives will be aligned, ideally, to the vision and the goals of the organisation. That's going to help you, because then when you start to have your conversations with each other, then you're clear about what it is we're trying to achieve here. And you may well have specific objectives in relation to your functional area.